Hi everyone, welcome to my YouTube channel. It's Nashola Sewing. In today's tutorial, we'll be learning how to make this scrub. For this tutorial, I'll be needing at least 3 yards of material, my thread, my scissors, my curve rule, my ruler, my measuring tape, and my chalk. So let's get right into the video. So the first part I'll be cutting is the trouser part of the scrub. I'll first of all fold my fabric into two so as to get the part I'll be using to cut the front. So I'll be cutting the front first. So I'm going to fold my fabric into two to get the amount of fabric you're going to use to avoid a whole lot of wastage. You can just divide your lap measurements by two, then add like 2 inches to it so to help you minimize your fabric. So I was just measuring my lap measurements divided by 2 plus extra 2 inches. So that's what I'll be using to fold this front part. So after that was done, the first thing I'll be doing is to roll my starting point. So I'll just be taking 1 inch across each starting point. Then after I take 1 inch round, I'm just going to draw a line across. So the next measurement I'll be taking is my crotch depth. So I just divided my hip by 4 and then marked it across. So I'm just marking my hip measurement divided by 4. Then after I mark it, I'm just going to draw a straight line across. So this is a scrub trouser, so it's not a tight trouser, it's a free trouser. So, and this trouser is still going to have a band. So I am not minusing anything. You know, normally you're supposed to minus like 2 inches for the band before you could draw your crotch depth. So I'm not minusing anything. I am just drawing exactly what I got from my hip measurement divided by 4. So what I'm going to do now is to take 1.5 inch seam allowance all through the length of the trouser. I'm going to be taking it from the top to the bottom, and I'm just going to roll it out after I'm done. So I just went ahead to measure where my trouser will be stopping, so I would know where I will stop taking my 1.5 inch allowance all through. So I'm just going to roll the length of my trouser. After I've already measured the length of my trouser, I'm just going to roll a straight line across. So I continued with the 1.5, then I am just rolling the line across. So after that was done, this trouser is going to have an elastic, it's not going to have zip. So I just went ahead to take my hip measurements divided by 4 on the starting point, and I will also do the same thing on the crotch line. After marking my hip measurements divided by 4, I came up by 2 inches from the crotch line so I can get my hip line. So I'm just going to roll it and draw a straight line across it. So now I'm connecting the points I've marked together to form a box. So on my crotch line, I'll be marking my crotch extension. So how I got my crotch extension is to divide my hip measurement by 4. Then what I got, I also divided it by 4 again, then I marked. Then the next thing I went ahead to do was to come down my crotch line by 1 inch. On this crotch line, I'll be marking out my round tie measurement. So all measurement I'll be taking will be starting from that 1.5 inch allowance. So I went ahead to measure my tie divided by 2, then I marked it there. So all measurement I'm taking is starting from the 1.5 inch allowance line I have already drawn out. At that angle, I just came up by 1.5 and mark so I can create my curve. I firstly did my freehand, but I wasn't liking what I was getting, so I had to redraw the curve with my curve rule. So now the next thing I'll be marking now is my waist to knee measurement. My waist to knee measurement, that's what I'll be marking. After I've marked that, I went ahead to draw a straight line across. So after that was done, the next thing I'm just going to do is to take my new round measurement divided by 2. Then I also went to the hem. I took my ankle round measurement divided by 2. Then I am just drawing lines to meet each point. So that's basically all for the front part of the trouser. So I'm just going to go ahead to cut out what I've already drawn. Then since the trouser is on a fold, I'm just going to split it into 2. So that's all for the front part. Then I'm now going to go ahead and fold what I'll be needing for the back. So what I folded was like what I had for the front plus extra 4 inches allowance. You can have like from 3 to 4 inches allowance extra from what you folded from the front. So I went ahead to draw my starting line. Then I am just trying to place the front to the back properly. So what I just did here was to make a mark to differentiate between the front and the back of the trouser. So after that was done, I came out by 1.5 inch at that point. Then I came from the crotch extension, I came out by 2 inch. So I'm just going to be taking 1.5 down. The only part I marked 2 inch was the extension part. On the upper part of the trouser, I'm just going to come up by 1.5 inch. So that's just what I'll be doing. Then I'll be connecting my lines. From the 2 inches I came up by, I'm just going to connect it to meet the waistline. Then I'm now going to connect the other part of the dot with my free hand. So after that was done, I just went ahead to cut. So that's basically all for the back of the trouser. And I'll also go ahead and divide it into 2 for both legs. So this is me just trimming out the parts that I will not be needing for this cloth. Then I've also gone ahead to cut the part I'll be using for the pocket and the parts I'll be using for the band. So now I'm going to set that aside. That will be all for the trouser part. Now we are heading to the top part of the cloth. First things first, I'll be rolling out a starting line. So basically I'll be taking my shoulder measurement divided by 2 and marking it at that point. Then I'm marking 4 inches for my neck width. Then I'm coming down by 1 inch and connecting my shoulder slant to the neck. So the next thing I'm going to do is to determine how I want the neck to be. So what I'm doing right now is just placing my tape and to measure my neck. So the first thing I did was to take my measuring tape up by 2 inches because I want a come down along the neck side. Then I marked the length of my shirt and I also went ahead to draw my allowance line. So that's just all I did. Then the next thing I went ahead to do was to mark my shoulder to nipple, my shoulder to waist, and I'm just ruling a line across it. So I've already rolled out my shoulder to waistline and my shoulder to bust point. So just ruling a line. So from the 4 inches I took earlier for the neck, I came in by 1 inch because I'll be replacing it later on. So the next thing I'm now going to go ahead to do is to determine my neckline. So I'm just placing my tape to make sure my measurements are accurate. So for your neckline, your chest line rather, you divide your bust measurements by 6. Then whatever you get, you add 1.5 inches. So that's what I got. I marked it at that point, but it was not enough for me, so I just decided to come down by 1 inch because that's how I want mine to be. So I just came down by 1 inch, marked it there, then rule out the lines. So on the chest line, what I'm just going to do is just to mark my back measurement, which is 7. So I just marked it there, then rule a straight line to connect to the shoulder. At that line I wrote to connect to the shoulder, which will serve as my armhole, and to create my armhole curve. So what I did was to just divide what I got there by 2, then came in by half an inch. Before I marked out my armhole curve, I discovered that it was not enough for me to my liking, so I just came down more and then ruled another line. So I will not be using the first chest line I drew initially, I'll be using the second one. So I just continued with the process of drawing my armhole curve. What I got at that shoulder line, I divided it by 2. Then I took my bust measurement at my new chest line, and then I'm just going to go ahead and connect the 3 points with my armhole curve. So I just drew out my curve. So after that was done, on the chest line I added 2 inches for ease and 1 inch for seam allowance, because this scrub is not going to be fitted on the body, it has to be free. Then on the hip line I also measured what I had. So the next thing I'm going to do is to measure how deep I want my neck to be. So I came down by 1.5 for the back, because I'll be marking both the back and the front on this piece. Then on my chest line I came in by 0.5 inch, and then I now connected it to the 1 inch I came out by at the upper part, the shoulder part of the scrub. On the waistline I took my waist measurement divided by 4, added 2.2 inches and then 1 inch for seam allowance. Then I went ahead to connect the points to meet my hip line. So the next thing I'm going to do is to go ahead and cut. So I'm just going to cut out. After I've already cut out the front part, I'm just going to fold the piece I'll be needing for the back part. So after folding, I'm just going to properly arrange the front piece on the back piece. So the next thing I'm just going to do is to come down by 2 to 3 inches for that lower part. So in my own case I came down by 3 inches. This will help for the come down effect at the front part of it. So I went ahead to rule with my ruler, and then the next thing I'm going to do is to cut out the back piece. Just pay attention to how I'll be cutting it. At this point I want to correct a mistake. Okay, at this point you would not cut the armhole like I did, so that you would not make a mistake and then have issues at the back. So you will not cut the armhole yet. I will tell you when to cut the armhole. So instead of cutting the armhole for the back, the only thing you will just do is just to cut out the shoulder for the back piece. So that's just the thing you will do. You won't cut the armhole, just the shoulders. So the next thing you're going to do is just to pull down the front of the cloth to make the back. Then you're going to now fold the upper part. You just fold up the upper part to meet the front part, just like I am doing here. So if by adventure you made the mistake I did earlier, so if peradventure you had already cut out your shoulders earlier instead of pausing, like you missed the pause part, you don't have to panic. Okay, what you will just do is just to cut out the excess part at the shoulder. So the next thing I went ahead to do was to replace what I marked for my front neck width at the back. So I just replaced it at that point. If you mark 3 inches for your front neck width, you can also mark 3 inches for the one at the back. So you can just pay attention to the way I'll be cutting it. So I am just cutting it carefully. So after you must have cut out your neckline, you will just proceed to cutting out your armhole. What you just have to do is just to ensure that the material is still in the fold before you cut out your armhole. After that, I came in and cut out my front neckline. I am just cutting out that front neckline on only the front part. So what I now proceeded to do was to measure my neckline. I didn't want it to be too wide, so I was just being careful. So I just went ahead to check how deep it is, and it was okay. So the next thing I'll be doing is just folding up my fabric. So the next thing I'm going to do is to cut out the facing for the back. I would want the back to have a facing that will be facing outward. So I am just going to ensure that I have enough fabric. Then at that point I came up by 7 inches, but I would advise you come up by 8 to like 9 inches. So I just cut out the excess. After cutting the 7 inches, I noticed it was small, so for yours you just come up by 8 to 9 inches for yours. So you just have to just trace out the neckline for the back, trace it through the, cut out through the shoulders, then cut it through the armhole. So that's how we're just going to create the facing for the back. So what I'm just doing is just to mark the wrong side. I had already gone ahead to cut out piece that I'll be using to turn the neckline in front. So it's about 3 inches wide and about 12 inches long. So for the pocket too, I cut about 8 inches wide and about 9 inches long. So the pocket will be facing where my arrow is facing. Then I went ahead to cut the part I'll be using for my sleeve. So what I'm just going to do is just to draft my basic sleeve, where I'll be coming down by 5 inches at this point. Then I'm coming in by 4 inches at the point where I marked 5 inches. On the upper part, so I'll also be coming in by 4 inches. Then I'm now going to get the midpoint of what I have over there and mark it. Then I am going to rule a line across the bicep line. That is the 5 inches line I'd taken earlier. So I came down to the hem to mark my sleeve round measurement. So I'm just going to be taking my sleeve round measurement at that point. Then I'll be measuring my armhole, like my biceps round measurements at that point, with extra 2 to 1.5 inches for allowance. So I am just marking what I got over there. Then I'm going to then pick up my curve rule and draw my armhole curve. So the first thing I'll be doing is to make a curve upward to meet the part I marked, the midpoint of the 4 inches I mark. After I make the first curve upward, I'm now going to connect my bicep round to the curve with a downward curve. So that's just it. Then I'm going to connect the curve to meet the armhole, then measure whatever I get at that point. After measurement, I saw it was enough, so the next thing I'm just going to do is just to cut out the sleeve. After cutting out the sleeve, the next thing I'm just going to do is just to make a notch at the middle of the sleeve. Then I'll set it aside. So that brings us to the end of this part of the tutorial.